A stirrup is a light frame or ring that holds the foot of a rider, attached to the saddle by a strap, often called a stirrup leather. Stirrups are usually paired and are used to aid in mounting and as a support while using a riding animal. They greatly increase the rider's ability to stay in the saddle and control the mount, increasing the animal's usefulness to humans in areas such as communication, transportation and warfare. In antiquity, the earliest foot supports consisted of riders placing the feet under a girth or using a simple toe loop. Later, a single stirrup was used as a mounting aid, and paired stirrups appeared after the invention of the treed saddle. The stirrup was invented in China in the first few centuries CE and spread westward through the nomadic peoples of Central Eurasia. The use of paired stirrups is credited to the Chinese Jin dynasty and came to Europe during the Middle Ages. Some argue that the stirrup was one of the basic tools used to create and spread modern civilization, possibly as important as the wheel or printing press. Modern stirrups come in a wide variety of styles, sizes and materials and are attached to most saddles by means of adjustable stirrup leathers, which can be altered in length to fit both the size of the rider and the need to remain over the horse's optimal center of balance for a given equestrianism discipline. There are safety concerns associated with the use of stirrups, including a risk that a fallen rider may get their foot caught in the stirrup and be dragged by the horse, or that long hours of use without rest may cause problems in the human foot's peroneus tertius tendon. Stirrups are safer to use when riding boots are worn, and proper sizing and placement of the foot on the stirrup increases both safety and usability. Etymology. The English word stirrup stems from Old English stirrup, stigrap, Middle English stirrup, styrope, i.e. mounting a climbing rope. From Old English stigen, to ascend. History. The stirrup, which gives greater stability to a rider, has been described as one of the most significant inventions in the history of warfare, prior to gunpowder. As a tool allowing expanded use of horses in warfare, the stirrup is often called the third revolutionary step in equipment, after the chariot and the saddle. The basic tactics of mounted warfare were significantly altered by the stirrup. A rider supported by stirrups was less likely to fall off while fighting, and could deliver a blow with a weapon that more fully employed the weight and momentum of horse and rider. Among other advantages, stirrups provided greater balance and support to the rider, which allowed the knight to use a sword more efficiently without falling, especially against infantry adversaries. Contrary to common modern belief, however, it has been asserted that stirrups actually did not enable the horseman to use a lance more effectively, though the cantled saddle did. Early development. The invention of the stirrup occurred relatively late in history, considering that horses were domesticated in approximately 4500 BCE, and the earliest known saddle-like equipment were fringed cloth sapads with breastpads and croppers used by Assyrian cavalry around 700 BCE. The earliest manifestation of the stirrup was a toe loop that held the big toe and was used in India late in the 2nd century BCE, though may have appeared as early as 500 BCE. This ancient foot support consisted of a looped rope for the big toe which was at the bottom of a saddle made of fiber or leather. Such a configuration was suitable for the warm climate of South and Central India, where people used to ride horses barefoot. A pair of megalithic double-bent iron bars with curvature at each end, excavated in Junarpani in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, have been regarded as stirrups, although they could as well be something else. Buddhist carvings in the temples of Sanchi, Mathura and the Bajra caves dating back between the 1st and 2nd century BCE figure horsemen riding with elaborate saddles with feet slipped under girths. In this regard, archaeologist John Marshall described the Sanchi relief as the earliest example by some 5 centuries of the use of stirrups in any part of the world. Later, a single stirrup was used as a mounting aid by a nomadic group known as the Sarmatians. The invention of the solid saddle tree allowed development of the true stirrup as it is known today. Without a solid tree, the rider's weight in the stirrups creates abnormal pressure points and make the horse's back sore. Modern thermography studies on treeless and flexible tree saddle designs have found that there is considerable friction across the center line of a horse's back. A coin of Quintus Labienus, who was in service of Parthia, minted circa 39 BCE, depicts on its reverse a saddled horse with hanging objects. Smith suggests they are pendant cloths, while Thayer suggests that, considering the fact that the Parthians were famous for the mounted archery, the objects are stirrups, but adds that it is difficult to imagine why the Romans would never have adopted the technology. In Asia, early solid-treed saddles were made of felt that covered a wooden frame. These designs date to approximately 200 BCE. One of the earliest solid-treed saddles in the West was first used by the Romans as early as the 1st century BCE, but this design also did not have stirrups. The first dependable representation of a rider with paired stirrups was found in China in a Jin dynasty tomb near Nanjing dated approximately about 322 CE. An earlier representation of a single mounting stirrup was found in a tomb figuring near Changsha that dated to 302 CE. The stirrup appeared to be in widespread use across China by 477 CE. Stirrups in Europe by the late 6th or early 7th century, primarily due to invaders from Central Asia, such as the Avars. Stirrups began spreading across Asia to Europe from China. In terms of archaeological finds, the iron pear-shaped form of stirrups, the ancestor of medieval European types, has been found in Europe in 7th century Avar graves in Hungary. A total of 111 specimens of early average apple-shaped cast-iron stirrups with elongated suspension loop and flat, slightly inward bent tread had been excavated from 55 burial sites in Hungary and surrounding regions by 2005. The first European literary reference to the stirrup may be in the Strategikon, traditionally ascribed to the Byzantine Emperor Maurus, and therefore written sometime between 575 and 628 CE, but this is widely disputed, and the work is placed in the 8th and 9th century by others. Maurus's manual notes the appropriate equipping of imperial cavalry. The saddles should have large and thick clothes. The bridles should be of good quality. Attached to the saddles should be 2 iron steps, a lasso with a thong. Dennis notes that the lack of specific Greek word for stirrup evidences the novelty to the Byzantines, who were supposed to have adopted these from the bitter enemy the Avars, and subsequently passed them on to the future enemies, the Arabs. An early 7th century date is secured for most Hungarian finds of stirrups with elongated suspension loops, though some of these must even be dated to before 600. Literary and archaeological evidence taken together may indicate that the stirrup was in common military use in south-central Europe and the eastern Mediterranean by the latter half of the 6th century, with the Byzantine Empire having them in use by the year 600. By the 8th century stirrups began to be adopted more widely by Europeans. The earliest stirrups of Western Europe, those of Budenheim and Regensburg, were either brought from the Avar Khaganate as booty or gifts, or were local imitations of stirrups in use at the time among Avar warriors. However, the Avar-style stirrups were not as widely adopted in Western Europe. Stirrups do not appear in the Merovingian and Italo-Lombard milieu in large numbers, nor as frequently as within the Carpathian Basin. Most other stirrups found in Germany that date to the 7th century do not resemble the Iron-Ava style commonly found in burial assemblages from Hungary and neighboring regions. Instead, hanging mounts occasionally found in burial assemblages in southern Germany suggest the use of wooden stirrups. The scarcity of early medieval stirrup finds in Western Europe was noted by Bernard Batrach. Out of 704 8th-century male burials excavated in Germany until 1967, only 13 had stirrups. The earliest stirrups in the Baltic region are replicas of those in existence in Germany during the 7th century. In Northern Europe and Britain, the metamorphosis of earlier wood, rope and leather forms of stirrups to metal forms can be seen in the archaeological record, suggesting that one or more of the early forms have parallel development with those in Hungary, rather than being derived solely from the latter region. Quote, in Scandinavia, two major types of stirrups are discerned, and from these by the development and fusion of different elements, some almost certainly of Central European origin. Most other types were evolved. The first main type, Scandinavian Type 1, appears to owe little to Hungarian forms. The earliest variety of this type can be dated to the 8th century in Vendel Grave 3 in Sweden. The second principal type in North Europe has, as its most characteristic feature, a pronounced rectangular suspension loop set in the same plane as the bow as found amongst the Hungarian examples, and is predominantly centered in Denmark and England during the later 10th and 11th centuries. A variant of this type, called the North European stirrup, has been dated to the second half of the 10th century in Sweden, found at the boat burial cemetery at Valsgård, in Denmark from the 920s to the 980s, during the reign of the Jelling kings. Many leading Danes were buried with military honors and equipped with stirrups, bits and spurs, in what are called cavalry graves, found mostly in North Jutland. Into England, it is argued, stirrups were not introduced by the Scandinavian settlers of the 9th century but are more likely related to later Viking raids led by Cnut the Great and others during the reign of King Ethel. In what today is France, Charles Martel distributed seized lands to his retainers on condition that they serve him by fighting in the new manner, which some attribute to his recognizing the military potentialities of the stirrup. Later, Charlemagne ordered his poorer vassals to pool the resources and provide a mounted and armed knight, though the system proved unworkable, and instead the system of distributing land to vassals based on a knight service was developed. Great Stirrup controversy. The introduction of the stirrup not only made the mounted warrior supreme in medieval warfare, but may have initiated complex and far-reaching social and cultural changes in Europe. Some scholars credit the birth of feudalism and its subsequent spread into northern Italy, Spain, Germany and into the Slavic territories to this use of the stirrup. It is argued that the rising feudal class structure of the European Middle Ages derived ultimately from the use of stirrups. Few inventions have been so simple as the stirrup, but few have had so catalytic an influence on history. The requirements of the new mode of warfare which it made possible found expression in a new form of Western European society dominated by an aristocracy of warriors endowed with land so that they might fight in a new and highly specialized way. Other scholars dispute this assertion, suggesting that stirrups may provide little advantage in shock warfare, but are useful primarily in allowing a rider to lean farther to the left and right on the saddle while fighting, and simply reduce the risk of falling off. Therefore, it is argued, they are not the reason for the switch from infantry to cavalry in medieval armies, nor the reason for the emergence of feudalism. Japanese stirrups. Stirrups were used in Japan as early as the 5th century. They were flat-bottomed rings of metal-covered wood, similar to European stirrups. The earliest known examples were excavated from tombs. Cup-shaped stirrups that enclosed the front half of the rider's foot eventually replaced the earlier design. During the Nara period, the base of the stirrup which supported the rider's sole was elongated past the toe cup. This half-tongued style of stirrup remained in use until the late Heian period, when a new stirrup was developed. The Fukuro Abumi or Musashi Abumi had a base that extended the full length of the rider's foot, and the right and left sides of the toe cup were removed. The open sides were designed to prevent the rider from catching a foot in the stirrup and being dragged. The military version of this open-sided stirrup was in use by the Middle Heian period. It was thinner, had a deeper toe pocket and an even longer and flatter foot shell. This stirrup stayed in use until European-style stirrup rings were reintroduced in the late 19th century. It is not known why the Japanese developed this unique style of stirrup. These had a distinctive swan-like shape, curved up and backward at the front so as to bring the loop for the leather strap over the instep and achieve a correct balance. Most of the surviving specimens from this period are made entirely of iron, inlaid with designs of silver or other materials, and covered with lacquer. In some examples there is an iron rod from the loop to the footplate near the heel to prevent the foot from slipping out. The footplates are occasionally perforated to let out water when crossing rivers, and these types are called Suiba Abumi. There are stirrups with holes in the front forming sockets for a lance or banner. Stirrup leathers. Because the rider must be able to move his or her legs while riding, stirrups cannot be attached on the body of the saddle itself, but rather must be attached in a manner that allows the rider's leg a full range of motion. Therefore, stirrups are attached to a saddle by means of adjustable straps called stirrup leathers. Depending on the design of a saddle, stirrup leathers may be attached to a stirrup bar, a small forged steel bar embedded into the saddle tree, or may be wrapped around the bars of the tree itself, because different riders are of different heights, and stirrups also may need to be adjusted up or down to accommodate different types of activity. Stirrup leathers have buckles and holes that allow length to be adjusted. On an English saddle, leathers are quite thin, only about 1 inch wide. On a Western saddle, they are very heavy, 3 to 4 inches wide on the side closest to the horse, and even wider, expanded into a decorative fender on the outside. Stirrup leathers on other saddle designs fall in between the extremes represented by the English and Western saddles. Stirrup leathers are usually manufactured so that the smooth side of the leather faces the wearing surface, as the smooth side wears less quickly than the rough side. There are also modern alternatives to leather, including nylon, plastic-covered nylon or leather over a nylon-reinforced core. These new leathers may last longer and also resist stretching. On the other hand, they may chafe and rub the leg, and poorly made products may break more easily than leather, as the rider's whole weight must be carried at one side when mounting on an English saddle. One stirrup leather often becomes stretched longer than the other, usually the left one, because most mounting occurs on that side, while a simple adjustment of the leather can even up the stirrups, to preserve the integrity and longevity of the leathers. They should be switched to the opposite sides from time to time. On a Western saddle, with a heavier, permanently installed fender and stirrup leather that cannot be switched, stretching is slower and less extreme, though it also occurs in this type of saddle. Any unevenness in the leathers can be managed by adjusting the stirrup length, and, if necessary, by adding extra holes in the leathers to allow them to be buckled at an intermediate point between the existing pre-punched holes provided by the Saddle manufacturer. Adjustment and uses of stirrups. There are two basic methods of using stirrups: a shorter stirrup to allow more mobility and a longer stirrup to allow greater control. The stirrup itself is similar, but the length of the stirrup leather is different. In each case, the stirrup length allows the rider to remain over the center of balance of the horse for the average speed characteristic of the discipline. The faster the horse travels, the more forward the rider must be positioned, and hence the shorter the stirrup. Long stirrups allow the rider to ride with a long leg, with the knee relaxed and only slightly bent, allowing a deep and stable seat in the saddle. When riding a long stirrup, the rider has excellent control of the horse and the greatest ability to feel and communicate with the horse via the riding aids. This provides a sturdy base for activities where precision is required or when the rider is at risk of being unseated. For both reasons, long stirrups were thus the choice of heavy cavalry such as the medieval knights, who fought in close quarters and used weapons such as the lance and long, heavy swords. Historically, this type of stirrup adjustment and the riding seat it produced was called leather. Today it is the choice for dressage and many types of Western riders. Shorter stirrups require a rider to keep the knees bent at a greater angle. When riding in a short stirrup, the rider has the ability to partially stand up and get the seat clear of the saddle. This allows more mobility than a longer stirrup would, but at the cost of having less feel of the horse and less security. It is a position designed to help the horse achieve greater speed, and also allows the rider greater physical mobility in the saddle. When riding with short stirrups, the rider often adopts what is known as a forward seat, thus inhibiting the horse's balance and athletic maneuverings as little as possible. In the past, this style was preferred by light cavalry. These fighters required speed and needed the flexibility to turn their own bodies in any direction to use light weapons such as the bow, javelin, short swords, and later, the rifle and pistol. The horsemen of Central Asia, such as the Mongols, used this type of stirrup, as did the Islamic Bedouin and Moors of the Middle East and North Africa. Historically, this type of stirrup adjustment and the seat it produced was called la gineta. Modern jockeys, eventers, and show jumping riders use this type of stirrup, as do some cowboys when performing certain jobs that require a forward position to allow agility of horse and rider, such as calf roping, while an inexperienced rider may feel more secure with a slightly too short stirrup. In reality, it is actually easier to be thrown from the horse because the rider's legs act as a stabilizing agent. Much in the same way the long pole of a tightrope walker balances the acrobat. Obviously, a stirrup leather so long that a rider cannot reach it is useless, and a stirrup length that does not allow a rider with a properly positioned leg to keep the heel lower than the toe is also easily lost. However, shortening the stirrup until the rider feels they will not lose the stirrup is counterproductive. The goal of correct equestrianism is to make maximum use of the leg. Lengthening the leg creates a more secure seat, while shortening the stirrup is done only to accommodate the needs of the horse to perform athletic movement. Thus, correct stirrup length creates a balance between control and mobility that fits the discipline performed. There are a spectrum of stirrup lengths, which the rider may choose depending on the purpose. For example, in dressage, the longest possible stirrup length is used in order for the rider to have complete control over every nuance of the horse's movement. Likewise, a very long stirrup is used in the Western sport of cutting, where, though the rider relinquishes control to the horse, requires maximum security to stay in the saddle during the rapid stops, turns and bursts of speed the horse uses when maneuvering cattle. For a comfortable ride over long hours at slow speeds, the long stirrup is also preferred by trail riders. Riders jumping low fences may wish for an intermediate-length stirrup that can allow the horse some freedom of movement, while supporting the rider over the fence, and still providing enough leg for excellent communication. A rider traveling rapidly cross-country, over varying terrain while fox hunting or endurance riding, will also have an intermediate stirrup, needing to strike a compromise between mobility for the horse and the need of the rider to not be unseated. In the Western rodeo sport of calf roping, a moderately short stirrup is also required to help the horse to sprint quickly from the box, and to allow the cowboy the freedom to swing a lariat. A show jumping rider will have a shorter stirrup than other English riders, in order to maximize the jumping effort of the horse. However, the rider also has the challenge of staying on over the fence and controlling the horse through rapid changes of pace and direction, so still needs some length of leg for stability. Jockeys must be completely off the horse's backs, balanced well forward over the withers to allow them at optimum speed in a long, galloping stride. Therefore they have the shortest possible stirrup length. The cost for maximum speed is minimum control and security. Jockeys must be in superb muscular condition and possess outstanding balance. They cannot achieve the finesse of leg aids needed in other equestrian sports, and must rely primarily on the use of the seat and a crop for speed, and on their arm strength for directional control or slowing down. The relative lack of control is clearly demonstrated by the use of pony horses to lead the race horse and jockey to the track, the use of assistants at the starting gate to load the horses, and the availability of outriders to assist the jockey at the end of a race or in the event of an accident. If the horse does anything but run in essentially a straight line with long gradual curves, or if anything goes seriously wrong, jockeys can easily be thrown, as the high rate of injury so amply illustrates.